The SUV flipped 3 times before it disappeared into the white void. Garrett Walsh dropped his chainsaw and ran. His boots punched through knee-deep snow. His lungs burned. His mind screamed one word. Don't be too late. Not again. He'd watched his wife die in a crash just like this. 3 years ago. Same mountain. Same helpless feeling. But this time, he reached the wreckage. This time, he pulled a woman from the twisted metal, a woman whose face he'd seen on magazine covers, whose company had just laid off half his town. She was bleeding, unconscious, and completely at his mercy. What he did next would change both their lives forever. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Garrett Walsh heard the crash before he saw it. He'd been cutting firewood behind his cabin, the chainsaw drowning out everything except the rhythm of his own breathing, when something made him stop. Call it instinct. Call it the same gut feeling that had kept him alive through 20 years of construction work and 2 tours in the Gulf. He killed the engine. Listened. The wind was howling down from the ridge, pushing the blizzard sideways across the mountain. Visibility was maybe 50 feet if that. The kind of day that made sensible people stay home. Then he heard it metal screaming against rock, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle losing its battle with gravity. Garrett didn't think. He dropped the chainsaw and ran. His boots broke through the crust of ice, sinking into powder that grabbed at his legs, like hands trying to hold him back. The cold bit at his face. His 53-year-old knees protested every step. But he kept moving because somewhere in that white hell, someone was dying. And Garrett Walsh knew exactly what it felt like to watch someone die while you stood there helpless. Sarah. Her name flashed through his mind like a blade. 3 years ago, almost to the day. Same mountain road. He'd been driving. Black ice. The truck had spun, and Sarah number. Not now. Focus. He crested a small rise and saw it, a black SUV upside down, half buried in a snowbank where it had come to rest after rolling off the road. The windshield was shattered. Steam rose from the undercarriage, like the vehicle was breathing its last. Garrett slid down the embankment, fighting for balance. He reached the driver's side and dropped to his knees in the snow. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. He wiped snow from the cracked window and looked inside. A woman hung suspended by her seatbelt, unconscious, blood running from a gash on her forehead. Blonde hair matted with red. Designer coat probably worth more than his truck. Expensive watch on her wrist. None of that mattered. Garrett tried the door. Jammed. He braced his feet against the frame and pulled with everything he had. The metal groaned, resisted, then finally gave way with a shriek. He caught the woman as he cut her seatbelt, lowering her carefully onto the snow. She was breathing shallow, rapid breaths that fogged in the frozen air. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Shock, maybe. Hypothermia setting in. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Open your eyes." Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment she looked at him without seeing, her gaze unfocused and confused. "You're okay," he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. "I've got you. You're gonna be okay." She tried to speak, but only a weak sound escaped her lips before her eyes rolled back and she went limp in his arms. Garrett looked around. The blizzard was getting worse. The temperature was dropping fast. He could try to carry her down to the main road, but that was 3 miles through deep snow and the road was probably impassable anyway. There was only one option. He lifted her lighter than he expected and started trudging back toward his cabin. The cabin wasn't much. 4 rooms built by Garrett's grandfather 70 years ago, maintained by 3 generations of Walsh men who didn't believe in asking for help. Wood stove for heat, hand pump for water, no cell service, no internet, no connection to the world below. That was why Garrett came here, to escape, to think, to spend time alone without well-meaning friends telling him he needed to move on from Sarah's death. Some wounds didn't heal. You just learned to carry them. He kicked open the door and carried the woman inside, laying her on the old leather couch near the stove. The fire had burned low while he was outside, but there were still embers. He fed it quickly, watching flames lick at the fresh wood. Then he turned back to his unexpected guest. The bleeding from her head had slowed, but the cut needed attention. He grabbed his first aid kit and knelt beside her, cleaning the wound with steady hands. She winced even in unconsciousness, her face tightening with pain. "Easy," he murmured. "Almost done." As he worked, he studied her face. Something about her seemed familiar. Sharp features, high cheekbones, the kind of face that belonged on billboards or business magazines. Then it clicked. He'd seen this woman before. Not in person on television. On the cover of Forbes. On the news 6 months ago, when her company announced the closure of the manufacturing plant in his town, putting 400 people out of work. Victoria Ashworth, CEO of Ashworth Industries. The woman his neighbors called the Ice Queen, after she gave that interview about necessary restructuring while families were losing their homes. Garrett sat back on his heels staring at her. Of all the people in the world to crash on his mountain, it had to be her. For a long moment, he didn't move. Part of him, a dark part he wasn't proud of, wanted to carry her back outside and leave her in the snow. Let nature take its course. Who would know he would know? Sarah would have known. Garrett closed his eyes, and he could almost hear his wife's voice. "You don't get to choose who deserves saving, Garrett. You just save them." He finished bandaging Victoria's head, then covered her with blankets, and sat down in the chair across the room to wait. She woke an hour later. Garrett was watching the fire when he heard her stir, followed by a sharp intake of breath. He turned to find her struggling to sit up, her eyes wide with panic. "Where am I? Who are you, what?" She pressed a hand to her bandaged forehead and winced. "What happened?" "Your car went off the road," Garrett said, keeping his voice calm. "About 2 miles from here. You've been out for a while." Victoria looked around the cabin, taking in the rough wooden walls, the simple furniture, the wood stove. Her expression shifted from confusion to something harder. Wariness. The look of a woman who'd learned not to trust anyone. "Where's my phone? I need to call my assistant. I have a board meeting tomorrow." "No signal up here," Garrett said. "And even if there was, no one's getting up or down this mountain until the storm passes. Could be a day, could be 2. That's unacceptable." Garrett almost laughed. "Take it up with the weather." Victoria's jaw tightened. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately, and she fell back onto the couch with a grunt of frustration. "You've got a possible concussion," Garrett said. "You're also borderline hypothermic. You need to rest and get warm, not run around trying to find a cell signal that doesn't exist. I don't need you to tell me what I need." "Yeah, well, I'm the one who pulled you out of a wrecked SUV, so maybe you could show a little gratitude." That stopped her. Victoria stared at him, and for just a second her mask slipped. He saw something underneath: exhaustion maybe, or fear. "You saved me. Found your car upside down in a snowbank. You were unconscious and bleeding. So yeah, I brought you here." She was quiet for a moment, then stiffly, "Thank you." "You're welcome." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, wind rattled the windows. "I know who you are," Garrett said finally. Victoria's expression didn't change. "Most people do. You're the one who closed the plant in Millbrook, put 400 people out of work. My neighbor lost his house because of you. Another one got divorced, couldn't handle the stress. Those were business decisions, nothing personal. Easy to say when you're not the one losing everything." Victoria met his gaze without flinching. "You think I don't know what loss feels like. You think because I wear expensive clothes and run a company that I haven't suffered. I think you've probably forgotten what it's like to be a regular person. And I think you've decided who I am without knowing anything about me." Garrett stood up. "I'm going to heat some soup. You should eat something. Get your strength back." He walked to the small kitchen, putting distance between them. His hands were shaking slightly, though whether from cold or anger he couldn't tell. He hadn't expected her to fight back. Hadn't expected the flash of pain in her eyes when he'd accused her of not understanding loss. But it didn't matter. She was still who she was. And as soon as this storm passed, she'd go back to her world of private jets and board meetings, and he'd go back to his world of grief and sawdust. They had nothing in common except the snow falling outside and the thin walls of an old cabin. They ate in silence. Garrett gave her the soup and a piece of bread, then sat across the room with his own bowl watching the fire instead of her. Victoria ate slowly, mechanically, like someone who'd forgotten that food was supposed to taste like something. Finally, she spoke. "You live here alone. Most of the time. No family. I have a son. He's 8. He's with his grandmother this week. And your wife—" Garrett's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "She died 3 years ago." Victoria's expression softened, just slightly. "I'm sorry." "Car accident. Same road you crashed on." He paused. "I was driving." The words hung in the air between them. Garrett didn't know why he'd said them. He never talked about Sarah's death, not to friends, not to his family, not even to his son most of the time. But something about being trapped in this cabin with a woman he had every reason to hate made the truth spill out. "It wasn't your fault," Victoria said quietly. "You don't know that." "No, but I know what it's like to carry blame that doesn't belong to you." Garrett looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time he saw something beyond the magazine covers and the news interviews. He saw a woman sitting alone in a stranger's cabin, injured and vulnerable, trying to connect with someone who clearly didn't want her there. "Tell me," he said. Victoria shook her head. "You don't want to hear it. Try me." She stared into the fire for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, quieter, stripped of the corporate armor she wore like a second skin. "My father built Ashworth Industries from nothing. Worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week for 40 years. When I was 12, my mother got sick. Cancer. Dad couldn't handle it, couldn't stand watching her fade away, so he threw himself into work even harder. Left me to take care of her." She paused, her jaw tightening. "She died when I was 15. I held her hand at the end. Dad was in a meeting. Couldn't be bothered to say goodbye to his own wife." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made me who I am. Hard, cold, capable." She laughed bitterly. "The Ice Queen. That's what they call me, isn't it?" Garrett didn't deny it. "My father died 2 years ago." Victoria continued. "Heart attack at his desk. He left me the company and a note that said, 'Don't let them see you cry.' That was his final advice. His final wisdom. Don't be human." "Is that why you closed the plant? Because you couldn't afford to be human?" Victoria's eyes flashed. "I closed the plant because it was hemorrhaging money. Because if I hadn't, the whole company would have gone under and 20,000 people would have lost their jobs instead of 400. I made the hard choice, the one no one else wanted to make. You could have handled it differently. Severance packages, job placement help, something. I did all of that. But it didn't make the news. People only remember the pain, not the parachute." Garrett thought about that. He thought about Jim Wilson, his neighbor, who had lost his job at the plant and then his house. But Jim had also mentioned something about a severance check, hadn't he? About some kind of retraining program he'd been too proud to take. Maybe he'd been wrong about her. Maybe she wasn't the heartless corporate villain he'd imagined. Or maybe she was just good at telling her side of the story. The storm grew worse as night fell. Garrett added more wood to the fire, but the cabin's old walls couldn't keep out all the cold. Temperature was dropping fast. He could feel it in the way the air bit at any exposed skin. Victoria was shivering again, despite the blankets piled around her. Her lips were taking on a bluish tint that worried him. "How are you feeling?" "Cold," she admitted. "Really cold." Your body's still recovering from the hypothermia. The shivering's actually a good sign, means you're trying to generate heat. But we need to get your core temperature up. He grabbed the heaviest blanket from his bed and draped it over her, then built the fire higher until flames were dancing against the darkness. It wasn't enough. Victoria's teeth were chattering now, her whole body trembling. She looked at him with something he hadn't expected to see: fear. "I can't stop shaking." Garrett knelt beside the couch, checking her pulse. Rapid. Too rapid. Her skin was cold to the touch. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to her. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." He went to the corner and grabbed the thick sleeping bag he kept for emergencies, unzipping it completely to form a wide pad. Then he looked at Victoria. "Body heat is the most efficient way to treat hypothermia. I need to share body heat with you, to get your core temperature up. I'm not trying to—" "I understand," Victoria said quietly. "Survival." "Yeah, survival." He helped her move from the couch to the sleeping bag on the floor near the fire. She was too weak to protest, too cold to care about propriety. He lay down beside her and pulled the blankets over them both. For a moment, they lay there stiffly. Two strangers forced into impossible intimacy by circumstance. Then, Victoria whispered something he'd never forget. "Can I slip under your blanket closer, I mean? I'm so cold." Her voice didn't carry seduction. It didn't carry manipulation or schemes. It carried only the raw, vulnerable truth of a woman who was freezing to death and had no one else to turn to. Garrett opened his arms. She moved into them, her body trembling violently against his chest. He could feel her heart racing, could feel the cold that had seeped into her bones. He held her tighter, sharing what warmth he had. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. Just breathe, nice and slow. We're going to get through this." She nodded against his shoulder, and slowly, so slowly, the shivering began to ease. Garrett stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside, holding a woman he'd hated 3 hours ago. A woman who was now completely dependent on him. A woman who, beneath all her armor and corporate masks, was just as broken as he was. He thought about Sarah. About how she used to fit against him just like this, her head on his chest, her breathing slow and steady. He hadn't held anyone since she died. He hadn't wanted to. But now, in this moment, with the fire crackling and the wind howling and a stranger's heartbeat syncing with his own, something shifted inside him. Something he'd thought was dead. Hours passed. The storm continued. Victoria's shivering finally stopped, and her breathing grew deep and regular. She was sleeping real sleep, not the unconsciousness of injury. Her body was fighting back, warming from the inside. Garrett should have moved away once she was stable, should have put distance between them again. He didn't. Instead, he lay there in the darkness, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The accident that killed Sarah. The grief that consumed him afterward. The way he'd retreated to this mountain, to this cabin, to hide from a world that kept spinning while his had stopped. And now this woman, this CEO, this ice queen, who didn't seem so icy anymore. She stirred against him, and he felt her wake. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them acknowledged the strange intimacy they'd found in survival. Then Victoria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lied to you earlier." "About what?" "When you asked if I knew what loss felt like. I said I did, but I didn't tell you the real reason I know." Garrett waited. "I was married once. For 2 years. His name was Michael. He was a good man, kind, patient, everything my father wasn't. He wanted children, wanted a real family." She paused, and he felt her body tense. "I was scared. Scared I'd become my father. Scared I'd lose myself in responsibility. So I kept putting it off. Next year, I said. After this project. After this merger. Always next year." Her voice cracked. "He died in a sailing accident. We'd had a fight that morning. I told him I wasn't sure I ever wanted children. He went out on the boat alone to think. The storm came in fast and he—" She couldn't finish. Garrett felt moisture on his chest, tears she was trying to hide. "That was 7 years ago," she said finally. "I haven't let anyone close since. Haven't wanted to. It's easier to be cold. Easier to make hard decisions when you don't let yourself feel." Garrett understood. God, he understood. "The night Sarah died," he said slowly, "we'd been arguing too, about money, about my hours at work. She wanted me to be home more, and I kept saying next month, after this job, after the cabin was done." He closed his eyes. "She was driving because I was too tired, because I'd been working 16-hour days to save for retirement that never came. If I'd been behind the wheel instead of her, you can't know that." "Maybe not. But I'll never stop wondering." They lay there in the darkness, two people who had spent years running from grief, finally standing still long enough to let it catch them. Victoria's hand found his in the tangle of blankets. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But for the first time in 3 years, Garrett Walsh didn't feel alone. The fire crackled. The storm raged. And somewhere in the darkness, two broken people began to recognize pieces of themselves in each other. The fire had burned down to embers when Garrett woke. He didn't move at first. Victoria was still pressed against him, her breathing slow and steady, her hand still loosely holding his beneath the blankets. The storm outside had quieted to a low moan, though he could tell by the way the cabin creaked that the wind hadn't stopped entirely. He should get up, feed the fire, put distance between them before she woke and things became awkward. But he didn't. For 3 years, Garrett had slept alone, had woken alone, had eaten breakfast alone while his son was at school, and the silence of the house pressed down on him like something physical. He'd told himself he was fine, told himself he didn't need anyone, told himself that Sarah had been his one shot at love, and when she died, that part of him died too. Now lying in the darkness with a stranger's heartbeat against his chest, he wasn't so sure. Victoria stirred. Her fingers tightened around his for just a moment before she seemed to realize where she was, who she was with. He felt her body stiffen. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Storm's still going. You're safe." She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she lay there, and he could almost feel her thinking, processing, deciding how to handle this situation she'd never planned for. "What time is it?" she asked. "Early morning, I think. Hard to tell without windows that aren't covered in frost." "I should." She started to move, then stopped, wincing. "My head." "Take it slow. You've been through a lot." Victoria eased herself into a sitting position, keeping one of the blankets wrapped around her shoulders. In the dim glow of the dying fire, her face looked different than it had on those magazine covers. Softer, more human. The sharp edges that made her look untouchable had been worn down by exhaustion and vulnerability. "I'm going to get the fire going again," Garrett said, standing. "Then I'll make some coffee. You should try to eat something." "You don't have to take care of me." "I know, but you're stuck here either way, so you might as well let someone help you for once." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or something deeper. "You're a strange man, Garrett Walsh." "How's that?" "You clearly don't like me. You think I'm responsible for destroying your town, and yet here you are offering to make me coffee like I'm a welcome guest." Garrett knelt by the wood stove, feeding kindling into the embers until flames began to lick upward. "My wife used to say that how you treat people who can't do anything for you is the only measure of character that matters. Right now, you can't do anything for me. You're injured, trapped, and completely dependent on my help. Seems like the perfect time to find out what kind of man I really am." "And what kind is that?" He looked over his shoulder at her. "Still figuring that out." The coffee was instant packets Garrett kept in the cabin for emergencies, but Victoria wrapped her hands around the mug like it was the finest thing she'd ever tasted. They sat across from each other, the fire crackling between them, and for a while neither spoke. It was Victoria who broke the silence. Tell me about your son." Garrett's expression softened in a way it hadn't all night. "Lucas. He's 8. Smartest kid I've ever met, and I'm not just saying that because he's mine. He reads 2 grades above his level. Asks questions I can't answer. His teacher says he's got a gift for math. He sounds special. He is. He's also angry. At me mostly. For not being there enough. For being so lost in my own grief that I forgot he was grieving too." Children process loss differently than adults. They don't always have the words for what they're feeling. "You sound like you know something about that." Victoria stared into her coffee. "I was 12 when my mother got sick. Old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to believe that if I just loved her hard enough she wouldn't die. When she did anyway, I felt like I'd failed her somehow, like my love hadn't been enough. That's not how it works. I know that now. But tell that to a 12-year-old girl sitting alone at her mother's funeral while her father shakes hands with business associates." Garrett shook his head slowly. "What kind of man does that? A broken one. A man who didn't know how to feel, so he stopped feeling altogether." Victoria's voice hardened. "I swore I'd never be like him, and then I looked in the mirror one day and saw his eyes staring back at me. Is that why you're here on this mountain in the middle of a blizzard?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she set down her coffee and pulled the blanket tighter around herself, as if the cold she was fighting wasn't entirely physical. "There's a man named Richard Keller, my chief financial officer. We've worked together for 6 years. I trusted him completely." Trusted, past tense. 3 days ago, I found out he's been quietly buying up shares of Ashworth Industries, building alliances with board members, laying the groundwork for a hostile takeover. Garrett let out a low whistle. "Your own CFO is trying to steal your company. He thinks I've gone soft, that the plant closures and the restructuring were signs of weakness, not strategy. He's convinced the board that I'm too emotional to lead, that I let my feelings interfere with business decisions. Is he right?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "I came up here to think, to figure out how to fight him. My assistant warned me about the storm, but I didn't listen. I thought I needed solitude more than safety." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was wrong about that too. So your CFO is stealing your company while you're stuck in a cabin with a man who has every reason to want you to fail." "Yes. That's quite a situation. I'm aware." Garrett studied her. The woman who had arrived here unconscious and helpless now sat before him with steel in her eyes despite everything. She was battered, exhausted, betrayed by someone she'd trusted, and she was already thinking about how to fight back. He understood that kind of stubbornness. He'd felt it himself in the months after Sarah's death, when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, but he did it anyway because Lucas needed breakfast. "What's your plan?" he asked. "I don't have one. I don't even know what's happening. For all I know, Richard has already convinced the board to remove me. I could have lost everything while I was lying unconscious in your cabin." "Would that be the worst thing?" Victoria stared at him. "Excuse me. Losing the company, would that be the worst thing that could happen to you? That company is my father's legacy. It's everything he worked for, everything I've sacrificed for. It's—" She stopped, her voice catching. "It's all you have," Garrett finished quietly. Victoria didn't respond. She didn't have to. The truth was written in the way her shoulders sagged, the way her hands trembled around the coffee mug, the way she looked suddenly smaller than the woman who commanded boardrooms and made billion-dollar decisions. "My wife used to tell me that I worked too much," Garrett said. "She'd say, 'Garrett, Lucas won't remember how much money you made. He'll remember whether you were there.' I always told her I was building something for our future, that the sacrifice would be worth it. What happened? She died. And I realized I'd been building a future we were never going to have while missing the present we could have shared." Victoria set down her mug. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of myself. Before. And I don't want you to wait until it's too late to figure out what actually matters. You don't know what matters to me." "No. But I know what you told me last night. About your husband. About how you kept putting off having a family until there was no family left to have. Sounds to me like the company isn't really what you're afraid of losing." Victoria stood abruptly, swaying slightly from the head injury. Garrett rose, too ready to catch her if she fell, but she held up a hand to stop him. "You don't get to do that," she said, her voice sharp. "You don't get to psychoanalyze me just because we shared body heat to survive. You don't know me. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've built, what I've—" "You're right, I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's running from something, because I've been running for 3 years. And what am I running from? Same thing I am. The fear that if you stop moving, stop achieving, stop building walls, you'll have to feel everything you've been burying." Victoria's eyes glistened. For a moment, Garrett thought she was going to slap him, or storm out into the blizzard, or do something equally dramatic. Instead, she did something he didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd been caught, who'd had their carefully constructed defenses stripped away by a stranger in a cabin on a mountain. "God," she said, wiping her eyes. "Is this what therapy feels like because I've been avoiding it for years? Cheaper this way, no copay." That earned a genuine smile, small, brief, but real. The first one he'd seen from her. "Sit down before you fall down," Garrett said. "I'll make more coffee." Victoria sat, and for the first time since she'd crashed into his life, the silence between them felt comfortable instead of hostile. The morning passed slowly. The storm hadn't let up, but it had shifted from violent to merely relentless. Snow continued to fall in thick curtains, piling against the cabin walls, until Garrett had to dig out the door just to check conditions outside. The world beyond was a blank white page, beautiful and deadly. Victoria watched him work, still too weak to help, but clearly frustrated by her own uselessness. She wasn't a woman accustomed to sitting idle while others took action. "How long do these storms usually last?" she asked when he came back inside, stomping snow from his boots. "Could be another day, could be 2. I've seen them go 3 days up here before." 3 days. She said it like a prison sentence. "You got somewhere to be. I have a company that's being stolen from me while I sit here drinking instant coffee. Not much you can do about that right now." "I know. That's what's driving me crazy." Garrett hung his coat by the door and sat down across from her. "Tell me about Richard, the CFO. What kind of man is he?" Victoria's expression darkened. "Smart, ambitious, the kind of man who smiles while he's sharpening a knife for your back. I should have seen it coming. There were signs, but I was too focused on the big picture to notice the details." "How did you find out?" "My assistant Margaret. She's been with me for 15 years, since before I became CEO. She overheard Richard on a phone call with one of the board members. He didn't know she was there." "What did he say?" "That I was emotionally compromised. That the plant closures had damaged my reputation beyond repair. That the board needed fresh leadership if the company was going to survive." Emotionally compromised. "Because I insisted on generous severance packages for the workers we laid off. Because I funded retraining programs. Because I refused to close the plant without giving people a safety net." Victoria's voice hardened. "Richard wanted to cut them loose with nothing. Said it was more cost-effective. When I overruled him, he started planning my removal." Garrett felt something shift in his understanding of her. The woman who had closed his town's plant wasn't the heartless corporate villain he'd imagined. She was someone who had tried to do the right thing and gotten stabbed in the back for it. "The people in Millbrook," he said slowly. "My neighbors. They got severance packages. 6 months' salary for anyone who'd been there over 5 years. 3 months for everyone else. Plus job placement services and retraining subsidies. Jim Wilson. He was a foreman. Lost his job and then his house. I remember the name. His severance was 18 months because of his tenure. If he lost his house, it wasn't because we didn't give him time to find new work." Garrett thought about Jim. About the drinking that had started after the layoff. about the divorce that followed, about how Jim had blamed Victoria Ashworth for everything, never mentioning the choices he'd made himself. "I owe you an apology," Garrett said. Victoria looked surprised. "For what?" "For assuming the worst about you. For thinking you were just another rich CEO who didn't care about regular people." "You had reason to assume that. It's what everyone assumes. It's what the news reports. Ice Queen closes plant, destroys town. They don't mention the severance. They don't mention the retraining. They don't mention that I flew to Millbrook personally to meet with union representatives and got screamed at for 2 hours by people who'd lost their jobs." "You went to Millbrook." "Of course I did. Those were real people losing real livelihoods. I owed them the decency of looking them in the eye." "I didn't know that." "No one does." Richard made sure the media focused on the negative, built the narrative that I was cold and uncaring. It made his eventual takeover easier to justify. Garrett shook his head slowly. "He played you. He played everyone. And now I'm trapped on a mountain while he finishes the job." Victoria's hands clenched into fists. "I built that company. Not alone, my father started it, but I'm the one who made it what it is today. I'm the one who worked 100-hour weeks for 15 years, who gave up everything, my marriage, my health, my chance at a family, to keep it alive. And now someone else is taking it from you." "Yes." "How does that feel?" Victoria looked at him, and for a moment her mask cracked completely. He saw the exhaustion underneath, the fear, the grief she'd been carrying for longer than she probably realized. "Like dying," she whispered. "Like everything I've done, every sacrifice I've made was for nothing." Garrett moved to sit beside her on the couch, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "What? 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. Sarah was gone. Lucas was traumatized. I was so deep in grief I could barely function. I came up to this cabin thinking maybe I wouldn't go back down. Maybe I'd just disappear." Victoria turned to look at him. "What changed?" "Lucas called me. He was staying with my mother and he called to ask when I was coming home. He said he'd made a picture for me at school and he wanted to show me." Garrett's voice thickened. "He was 5 years old. His mother had just died, and he made me a picture because he wanted his daddy to be proud of him." "So you went home." "I went home, and I realized that my life wasn't over. It had just changed. Everything I thought I was building didn't matter anymore. But there was still something worth living for. Someone who needed me more than I needed my grief." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't have anyone like that. No children, no husband. My parents are dead. The company is all I have." "That's not true." "What do you mean? You have 400 people in Millbrook who got severance packages because of you. You have workers all over the country who still have jobs because you made hard decisions to save the company. You have an assistant who's been loyal to you for 15 years. You have more than you think. You just can't see it because you've been so focused on what you've lost." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink them back to maintain the composure she'd worn like armor her whole adult life, but they fell anyway, tracking down her cheeks. "I don't know how to be anyone except who I am," she said. "I don't know how to stop running, how to stop building walls, how to let anyone in." "Neither do I," Garrett said. "But maybe we can figure it out together." She looked at him. Really looked, and something passed between them that neither could name. It wasn't romance, not exactly. It wasn't attraction, though, that might have been part of it. It was recognition. The sense of finding someone who understood your wounds because they carried matching scars. "Why are you helping me?" Victoria asked. "After everything I've done to your town, your neighbors, why do you even care what happens to me?" Garrett thought about the question. Thought about Sarah and her belief in kindness. Thought about Lucas and the man he wanted to be for his son. Thought about the woman beside him who had built empires and lost everything personal along the way. "Because you saved those jobs," he said finally. "Because you flew to Millbrook when you didn't have to. Because last night when you asked if you could share my blanket, you weren't playing games. You were just cold and scared and human. And I think that's who you really are, underneath all the armor. I think the Ice Queen thing is just a mask you wear so people can't hurt you. Victoria let out a shaky breath. You're the first person who's said that to me in years. Then the people around you aren't paying attention. She laughed a wet, broken sound. No. They're too busy trying to take what I've built. Not all of them. Margaret's still loyal. There might be others. When we get off this mountain, you'll find out who your real allies are. If there's anything left to fight for by then. There will be. People like Richard, they move fast, but they make mistakes. He's been planning this in secret, counting on you being caught off guard. He doesn't know you're going to come back swinging. Victoria wiped her eyes, and something changed in her expression. The grief was still there, but beneath it, steel was forming. The same steel that had built an empire. You're right, she said. I'm not going to let him win. Not after everything I've sacrificed. That's the spirit. But I need to know what's happening. I need information. Is there any way to contact the outside world from here? Garrett thought for a moment. There's an old radio in the back. Battery-powered emergency band only. Rangers use it sometimes. I've never tried it in a storm, but it might work. Victoria's eyes lit up. Can we try? He went to the back room and dug through old boxes until he found the radio covered in dust, but still intact. He brought it out and set it on the table, turning the dials until static crackled through the speaker. Emergency band only, he reminded her. We can't call anyone directly, but we might be able to pick up news broadcasts if we're lucky. They spent 20 minutes adjusting frequencies, listening to bursts of static and fragments of distant voices. Finally, they found something clear enough to understand a news station out of Denver reporting on the blizzard. Conditions expected to continue through tomorrow evening. Travelers are advised to avoid mountain roads. State Patrol has closed Highway 14 indefinitely. Keep listening, Victoria said, leaning forward. In business news, shares of Ashworth Industries rose 3% today, following reports that CEO Victoria Ashworth has been missing since Friday. Company officials say they have no information on her whereabouts, but CFO Richard Keller assured investors that the company's leadership transition plan is solid and that operations will continue uninterrupted. Victoria's face went pale. Leadership transition plan, she repeated. He's already moving. You don't know that for sure. I know Richard. Leadership transition plan is his way of telling the board that I'm not coming back. He's probably already scheduling votes, lining up support, telling everyone I'm dead or incapacitated. Garrett watched her, seeing the panic rising behind her eyes. He'd seen that look before, on his own face in the mirror after Sarah's funeral. The look of someone watching their world collapse in slow motion. Hey, he said firmly. Look at me. Victoria met his eyes. You're not dead. You're not incapacitated. You're going to get off this mountain and you're going to fight for what's yours. But you can't do that if you fall apart right now. Do you understand? I can't just sit here while he destroys everything I've built. You can. Because you don't have a choice. The storm is still raging. The roads are closed. Even if I could get you down the mountain, there's nowhere to go. You have to wait. And while you're waiting, you need to rest, recover, and plan. Because when that storm clears, you're going to need every ounce of strength you have. Victoria took a deep breath, then another. Slowly, the panic receded, replaced by something harder and more focused. You're right, she said. I need to think. I need to figure out who I can trust on the board. Who might still support me. Now you're talking. Margaret. She's loyal. And there are a few board members who've been with the company since my father's time. They might not like Richard's methods. What about allies outside the company, shareholders who'd rather have you in charge? Victoria's mind was clearly racing now, years of corporate strategy kicking into gear. There's a pension fund in New York that holds 8% of our shares. The manager, David Chen, he's always respected how I handle labor relations. The severance packages, the retraining. He might side with me over Richard. Anyone else? Maybe. I need to think. I need to... She winced, pressing a hand to her forehead. God, my head. You need to rest. The planning can wait a few hours. I can't rest. Not with everything that's happening. Victoria. Garrett put a hand on her shoulder, and she stilled at the touch. You took a serious hit to the head. You almost died of hypothermia. You've been running on adrenaline and fear for hours. If you push yourself now, you'll collapse before the storm clears, and then Richard wins by default. She looked at his hand on her shoulder, then up at his face. Why do you care so much? An hour ago you were accusing me of destroying your town. An hour ago I didn't know the whole story. Now I do, and I'm not going to stand by and watch a good person get destroyed by someone who doesn't deserve to shine her shoes. Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, small, tired, but genuine. You really are a strange man, Garrett Walsh. So I've been told. She let him lead her back to the couch, where she lay down under the blankets. Her eyes were already closing, exhaustion finally winning out over fear. Stay with me, she murmured. Just for a while. I don't want to be alone. Garrett hesitated. Then he pulled up a chair beside the couch and sat down. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She reached out and took his hand, and within minutes she was asleep. Garrett sat there watching the fire, listening to the storm, holding the hand of a woman who had gone from enemy to something else entirely in the space of a single night. He didn't know what would happen when the storm cleared. He didn't know if Victoria would win her battle with Richard or lose everything she'd built. He didn't know if whatever was forming between them would survive contact with the real world. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. For the first time in 3 years, he felt alive. And that terrified him more than any blizzard ever could. Victoria slept for nearly 4 hours. Garrett stayed beside her for the first 2, watching the fire, listening to her breathe, trying not to think about what it meant that he didn't want to let go of her hand. When his back started aching from the chair, he finally eased his fingers free and stood moving quietly so he wouldn't wake her. The radio was still on the table where they'd left it. He turned the dial, searching for more news, but all he found was static and fragments of weather reports. The storm was still raging, still blocking any hope of rescue or escape. He was stoking the fire when Victoria spoke behind him. How long was I out? He turned to find her sitting up, the blanket pulled around her waist, her eyes clearer than they'd been since the accident. Few hours. How's your head? Better. Still hurts, but the fog is gone. She touched the bandage on her forehead gingerly. You do good work. I've had practice. Lucas goes through bandages like most kids go through candy. Victoria smiled slightly. He sounds like a handful. He is. Best kind of handful. She was quiet for a moment, watching him work the fire. Then she said, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about running, about building walls. Yeah. You were right. I've spent my whole adult life keeping people at arm's length, telling myself it was necessary, that emotions were weaknesses I couldn't afford. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. But lying here thinking I might die in a stranger's cabin, I realized something. What's that? I'm not afraid of losing my company. Not really. I'm afraid of what happens if I lose it and there's nothing left. No identity, no purpose, just emptiness. Garrett set down the poker and turned to face her fully. That's not emptiness. That's possibility. What do you mean? When Sarah died, I thought my life was over. Everything I'd been husband, partner, future father of more kids, all of it vanished in one night. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out my insides and left the shell behind. Victoria nodded slowly. That's exactly how I felt when Michael died. But here's the thing I didn't understand until later. That hollow feeling, it's not emptiness, it's space. Space for something new to grow. The problem is most people fill it back up with the same old stuff, work distractions walls, because they're scared of what might happen if they leave it open. And did you leave it open? Garrett was quiet for a long moment. No. I filled it with guilt and grief and distance. I pushed everyone away. Told myself I was protecting Lucas by being strong, but really, I was just hiding. Took me 3 years to realize that hiding isn't the same as healing. What changed? Nothing yet. I'm still figuring it out. He met her eyes. But being here with you talking like this, it's the first time in 3 years I've felt like maybe there's another way. Victoria held his gaze. Something passed between them. Not romance, not exactly, but something equally intimate. Understanding. Recognition. The sense of two people seeing each other clearly for the first time. I want that, she said softly. Another way. I just don't know how to find it. Neither do I. But maybe we don't have to figure it out alone. Before Victoria could respond, the radio crackled to life. They both turned toward it, startled by the sudden burst of clear sound. Breaking news from New York. The board of Ashworth Industries has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning to discuss leadership changes in the wake of CEO Victoria Ashworth's continued absence. CFO Richard Keller is expected to present a motion for temporary transfer of executive authority. Victoria was on her feet before the report finished, swaying slightly, but ignoring Garrett's steadying hand. Tomorrow, she said. He's making his move tomorrow. You heard the storm reports. Roads won't be clear by then. I know. Her voice was tight with controlled fury. He planned this. The timing, the emergency meeting, he knew I was coming up here. He must have known about the storm. You think he set you up? I think Richard Keller doesn't leave anything to chance. He probably tracked my car, knew exactly when I'd be isolated. She laughed bitterly. And here I thought I was being paranoid when Margaret warned me to be careful. Garrett watched her pace, seeing the wheels turning behind her eyes. This wasn't the vulnerable woman who'd shared his blanket last night. This was the CEO, the strategist, the fighter. What are your options? He asked. Limited. If I can't get to New York before that meeting, Richard will have the board vote to strip my authority. Even if it's just temporary, it gives him control of the company. And once he has control, he'll make sure I never get it back. Can't you call someone? Get a message out? The radio's emergency band only. I can't call my lawyers or my allies on the board. She stopped pacing, her hands clenched at her sides. There has to be something, some way to stop this. Garrett thought about the problem like he would think about a construction challenge. Obstacles, resources, alternatives. What about Margaret, your assistant? You said she's loyal. She is, but she can't stop a board vote. No, but she can deliver a message. If we can reach her somehow, she can tell your allies what's happening. Rally support before the meeting. Victoria's eyes narrowed. How would we reach her? You said there's no phone signal up here. There isn't, but there might be another way. Garrett grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. There's a ranger station about 2 miles north of here. They have a satellite phone for emergencies. If the storm's died down enough, I might be able to make it there and back. 2 miles in this weather, you could die. I've hiked worse, and if I leave now while there's still daylight, I've got a better chance. Victoria stepped toward him, her expression torn between hope and fear. Garrett, you can't risk your life for my company. It's not worth it. Maybe not, but you're worth it. The words hung between them. Garrett wasn't sure where they'd come from, only that they were true. Somewhere in the past 24 hours, this woman had stopped being a stranger. Stopped being the enemy, stopped being just a CEO whose decisions had affected his town. She'd become something else, something he wasn't ready to name. Victoria's eyes glistened. You barely know me. I know enough, I know you're not the person I thought you were. I know you're fighting for something that matters to you. And I know that if our situations were reversed, you'd do the same for me. You can't know that. Yeah, I can. Because that's who you are underneath all the armor. The woman who flew to Millbrook to face people who hated her. The woman who gave severance packages when it would have been easier to cut and run. The woman who asked to share my blanket because she was scared, not because she wanted anything from me. He stepped closer. That's who you are, Victoria. And that person deserves someone willing to take a risk for her. Victoria reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong, steadier than it had been since the accident. If you're going to do this, she said, then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You're still recovering. I'm recovered enough. And you're not leaving me here to wait and wonder if you're lying dead in a snowbank somewhere. Victoria, don't. I've spent my whole life letting other people take risks for me while I sat safe in boardrooms. I'm done with that. If you're going out there, I'm going with you. They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Garrett shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. I prefer determined. Fine, but you stay behind me, you do exactly what I say, and if I tell you to turn back, you turn back. No arguments. No arguments, she agreed, then softer. Thank you, Garrett, for everything. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Thank me when we get to that ranger station. We've got a long walk ahead. They prepared quickly. Garrett found an old parka that had belonged to his father, too big for Victoria, but warm enough to save her life. He wrapped her in extra layers, checked her boots for leaks, made her drink water, even though she said she wasn't thirsty. Dehydration sneaks up on you in the cold, he explained. Your body doesn't tell you you're thirsty until it's too late. You know a lot about survival. I've been coming to this mountain since I was a kid. My grandfather built this cabin. My father taught me how to survive up here. Some lessons you don't forget. Victoria watched him move around the cabin with efficient purpose, gathering supplies, checking equipment. Your family means a lot to you. They're all I've got. Or they were until... He stopped his back to her. Until what? Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and she saw something raw in his expression. Until I pushed them away. After Sarah died, I couldn't stand being around people who reminded me of her. My mother, my brother, friends we'd had for years. I cut them all off. Told myself I needed space to grieve. But really, I was punishing myself. For what? For surviving. For being the one who walked away from that crash when she didn't. Victoria crossed the room and stood before him. That wasn't your fault. I know. Logically, I know. But grief isn't logical. It's a monster that lives in your chest and tells you lies until you start believing them. I understand. She reached up and touched his face, a gesture that surprised them both. I've been listening to that monster for 7 years. It told me I didn't deserve love because I wasn't there for Michael when he needed me. It told me that building walls was the only way to survive. It told me that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, controlled enough, I could outrun the pain. Did it work? No. It just made me into someone I don't recognize anymore. Her hand dropped, but she didn't step back. You're the first person who's seen through the armor since Michael died. The first person I've wanted to let in. Garrett felt something crack inside him, a wall he'd built so carefully, so deliberately, over 3 years of isolation. He'd told himself he was protecting Lucas by not getting involved with anyone. Told himself that loving Sarah meant never loving again. But standing here looking at this woman who had fought through her own grief to reach out to him, he realized how wrong he'd been. Victoria, he said, his voice rough, when we get off this mountain, don't. She shook her head. Don't make promises. Not yet. We don't know what's going to happen. With Richard, with your life, with any of it. Let's just get through today. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we figure out tomorrow. He nodded slowly. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was honest. And after so many years of lies, he'd told himself, Lies the world had told him about who he should be and how he should grieve. Honesty felt like a gift. "Ready?" he asked. Victoria pulled on the oversized parka, looking absurdly small inside it. But her eyes were fierce, determined. The eyes of a woman who'd built an empire and wasn't about to let it crumble without a fight. "Ready." They stepped out into the storm. The wind hit them immediately, a wall of frozen air that stole Garrett's breath and made Victoria stagger. He grabbed her arm, steadying her, and leaned close to speak directly into her ear. "Stay close. Follow my footsteps exactly. If you start to feel dizzy or confused, tell me immediately." She nodded, and they began to walk. The world had disappeared. Everything was white sky, ground air, a blank void that erased all sense of direction and distance. Garrett navigated by memory and instinct, finding the trail markers he'd memorized over decades of hiking this mountain. Victoria struggled behind him, her shorter legs fighting through snow that reached past her knees in places. But she didn't complain. Didn't ask to stop. Didn't do anything except put one foot in front of the other with the same relentless determination she'd probably used to build her company. An hour in, they reached a rocky outcropping that Garrett remembered from childhood. He pulled Victoria into its shelter, giving them a brief respite from the wind. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Cold. Tired. Fine." He checked her face, looking for signs of frostbite or hypothermia. Her cheeks were red from the wind, but her eyes were clear and focused. "We're about halfway. The hard part's over." Victoria laughed weakly. "That was the easy part. The first mile is the steepest. It's more level from here." "Good. Because I'm not sure I could climb another hill like that one." Garrett handed her a protein bar from his pack. "Eat this. You need the calories." She took it without argument, another sign of how much she'd changed since yesterday. The Victoria Ashworth he'd pulled from that wrecked SUV would never have taken orders from a stranger. This Victoria, the real one underneath all the armor, understood that sometimes you had to trust other people to survive. "Tell me about Lucas," she said between bites. "What's he like?" Garrett smiled despite the cold. "Curious. That's the main thing. Always asking questions. Why is the sky blue? How do birds fly? Why do people die? He exhausts me sometimes, but I love it. Reminds me of Sarah. She was the same way, always wanting to understand how things worked." "Does he look like her?" "Yeah. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same way of tilting his head when he's thinking about something." His smile faded slightly. "Sometimes I look at him and it hurts because I see her so clearly. But mostly it helps. Like she's still here in a way." "That's beautiful. It's survival. You find ways to keep the people you've lost close, even when they're gone." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't have that. Michael and I never had children. I don't have any piece of him left except memories. Memories are enough. They have to be." "Do they?" Garrett looked at her, seeing the grief that still lived behind her eyes after 7 years. "Maybe not enough. But there's something to hold on to while you figure out what comes next." Victoria finished the protein bar and tucked the wrapper in her pocket. "You're a good man, Garrett Walsh. Whatever happens after this, I want you to know that." "Victoria, I mean it. You could have left me in that car. You could have walked away a dozen times since then. Instead, you're risking your life to help me save a company that hurt people you care about. That's not nothing. You didn't hurt anyone. You made hard choices. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah. The people who hurt my neighbors were the ones who made those choices necessary. The market forces, the competition, the reality of running a business in a world that doesn't give a damn about small towns and working families. You just dealt with the hand you were dealt." Victoria's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "You're the first person who's ever said that to me. Everyone else just sees the layoffs, the closures, the ice queen who doesn't care. Everyone else doesn't know you. And you do." After one night, Garrett reached out and took her hand. I know enough. I know you're not cold. You're just careful. I know you're not heartless. You just learned to hide your heart because showing it got you hurt. And I know that somewhere underneath all that armor, there's a woman who wanted a family, who loved her husband, who tried to do right by the people who depended on her, even when doing right meant making impossible choices. A tear slipped down Victoria's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, the real me, not the magazine covers or the news reports or the reputation, just me. Garrett squeezed her hand. Thank me when we reach that ranger station. We're not done yet. They pushed on. The second half of the journey was easier, just as Garrett had promised. Flatter terrain, less wind once they dropped below the ridgeline. But the cold was relentless, seeping through their layers, numbing fingers and toes, turning every breath into a battle. Victoria stumbled twice, caught both times by Garrett's steady hand. She was pushing herself to the limit, he could see that. Operating on pure willpower. The kind of determination that had built an empire now focused on simply putting one foot in front of the other. Finally, through a break in the swirling snow, Garrett spotted it, a small wooden structure with a radio antenna rising from its roof. There, he said, pointing. The ranger station. Victoria looked up, and something like relief washed over her face. We made it. Almost. Come on. They covered the last 100 yards in a burst of adrenaline-fueled energy, reaching the station just as the wind kicked up again. Garrett tried the door, locked, but flimsy. One solid kick, and it swung open. Inside was dark and cold, but sheltered from the wind. Garrett found a lantern and lit it, revealing a small room with basic supplies, a cot, and most importantly, a satellite phone mounted on the wall. There, he said. Make your call. Victoria crossed to the phone, picked up the receiver, and dialed from memory. Her hands were shaking from cold, or nerves, Garrett couldn't tell. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. Hello? Margaret. Victoria's voice cracked. It's me. Oh my God, Victoria, where are you? Everyone thinks you're... I know, I'm alive, I'm safe. But I need you to listen very carefully. Garrett stepped back, giving her privacy, but he could hear enough to follow the conversation. Victoria laid out everything: the accident, the storm, Richard's betrayal, the emergency board meeting. Her voice was steady now, the CEO fully in control. I need you to contact David Chen at the New York Pension Fund, Victoria said. And Sarah Mitchell on the board. They're both loyal. Tell them what's happening. Tell them I'll be back as soon as the road's clear, but I need them to delay the vote. A pause. Then Victoria nodded. Yes, whatever it takes. Buy me time, Margaret. I'm not letting Richard take what we've built. She hung up the phone and turned to Garrett. Her face was pale, exhausted, but her eyes were burning with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. It's done, she said. Margaret's going to try to delay the vote. She thinks Chen will side with us. Maybe Mitchell too. So you've got a chance. A chance, not a guarantee. Richard's had months to build his coalition. I've got hours. Then we'd better get you off this mountain. Victoria looked at him, and suddenly all the CEO armor fell away again. She crossed the room, wrapped her arms around him, and held on tight. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For everything. For saving my life. For believing in me. For being willing to walk through a blizzard so I could make a phone call. Garrett held her, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the steady beat of her heart. He thought about Sarah, about grief and guilt, and 3 years of running from everything that made him human. And he realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, he'd stopped running. You're welcome, he said. They stayed like that for a long moment. 2 people who had found each other in a storm, holding on against the cold. Finally, Victoria pulled back. The storm's not getting any better. Should we stay here until it passes? Garrett checked the supplies in the station. Enough food and water for a day or two. A small heater that would keep them warm. It wasn't much, but it was safer than trying to hike back to the cabin in worsening conditions. "Yeah," he said. "We waited out here." They settled in, sharing the small cot to conserve warmth, talking through the night about everything and nothing. Their pasts, their fears, their hopes for a future neither could quite see yet. And somewhere in those hours between the darkness and the dawn, something shifted between them. Not love exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of love. The first real possibility either of them had felt in years. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the two people huddled together in a ranger station on the side of a mountain. But inside, something new was being born. Something that might just survive the cold. The storm broke just before dawn. Victoria woke to silence. Real silence, not the muffled roar that had surrounded them for 2 days. She was still pressed against Garrett, on the narrow cot, his arm draped across her waist, his breathing slow and steady. She didn't move immediately. Instead, she lay there feeling the warmth of his body, listening to his heartbeat, trying to memorize this moment before reality came crashing back. Because reality was coming. She could feel it waiting just outside that door, the board meeting, Richard's betrayal, the fight to save everything she'd built. In a few hours, she'd be Victoria Ashworth again, the Ice Queen, the CEO. The woman who didn't have time for warmth or vulnerability, or whatever this was that had grown between them. But for one more minute, she let herself be just Victoria. Just a woman who had found unexpected shelter in a stranger's arms. Garrett stirred beside her. "You're awake." The storm stopped. He listened for a moment, then nodded. "Sounds like it. We should be able to get down the mountain now." Neither of them moved. "Victoria," Garrett said quietly, "about last night. Don't." She turned to face him, saw the uncertainty in his eyes. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Whatever this is, it's the realest thing I've felt in years. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." "I wasn't going to apologize. I was going to ask what happens now. Now I go back to New York and fight for my company. And you go back to your cabin, and your son, and your life. That's it." Victoria reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw. "I don't know what that is. I just know I can't make promises I might not be able to keep. Not to you. You deserve better than that." Garrett caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm. "What if I'm willing to take the risk?" "Then you're braver than I am. Or more stubborn." She laughed despite herself. "That too." They lay there for another moment, suspended between what was and what might be. Then Victoria took a deep breath and sat up. "I need to call Margaret again. Find out what's happening with the board." Garrett nodded, the moment broken. He rose from the cot and moved to the window, checking the conditions outside while Victoria crossed to the satellite phone. Margaret answered on the first ring. "Victoria, thank God. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. What's happening?" "Chen is on board. He's going to vote against Richard's motion. Sarah Mitchell too. But it's going to be close. Richard's been working the fence-sitters all night." "When's the meeting?" 3 hours. Can you make it?" Victoria looked at Garrett, who was already pulling on his coat. "I don't know. The roads might still be closed." "There's a helicopter," Margaret said. "I chartered one yesterday just in case. It's standing by in Denver. If you can get to the nearest airport, I can have you here in time." Hope surged in Victoria's chest. "The county airport is about 20 miles from here. If the roads are clear enough." "Get there," Margaret said firmly. "I'll handle the rest." Victoria hung up and turned to Garrett. "There's a helicopter waiting in Denver. If I can get to the county airport." "I heard." He finished zipping his coat. "My truck's at the cabin. If the roads are passable, I can get you there in an hour." "Garrett, you've already done so much." "Victoria." He crossed to her, took her hands in his. "I'm not letting you face this alone. Not after everything. Let me help you get to that airport. After that, the rest is up to you." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need help, that she'd been fighting her own battles for 30 years. But looking into his eyes, she realized something. She was tired of fighting alone. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." They made good time back to the cabin. The storm had dumped 3 feet of fresh snow, but the wind had stopped, and the sky was clearing to a pale winter blue. Garrett navigated the trail with the confidence of someone who'd walked it 1,000 times, and Victoria followed, her body aching, but her mind sharp and focused. The cabin looked different in daylight, smaller, somehow more vulnerable against the vast white landscape. But Victoria felt a pang of something like loss as they approached. Whatever had happened between these walls had changed her. She wasn't sure she wanted to leave it behind. "Wait here," Garrett said. "I need to dig out the truck." He disappeared around the side of the cabin, and Victoria heard the scrape of a shovel against frozen ground. She went inside, gathering the few belongings she'd arrived with, her ruined coat, her cracked phone, the watch that had somehow survived the crash. On the table, she found a piece of paper and a pen. She hesitated, then wrote quickly. "Garrett, if I don't get the chance to say this properly, thank you, not just for saving my life, but for reminding me I still have one. Whatever happens in New York, I won't forget what you gave me on this mountain. V." She folded the note and left it on the table. Then she walked outside to find Garrett brushing snow off an old Ford pickup that looked like it had survived nearly as many storms as its owner. "She's not pretty," he said, catching her expression. "But she runs. At this point, I'd ride a donkey if it would get me to that airport." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and unexpected. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The drive down the mountain was treacherous. Snow had drifted across the road in places, forcing Garrett to navigate around obstacles that would have stopped a lesser vehicle. But the old truck handled it, chains biting into ice, engine growling with determination. Victoria watched Garrett drive, saw the concentration in his face, the easy competence of his hands on the wheel. This was a man who knew how to handle difficulty, who didn't panic when things got hard, who just put his head down and did what needed to be done. So different from the men she usually dealt with, the Richards of the world, all polish and ambition and hidden knives. "You're staring," Garrett said, without taking his eyes off the road. "Sorry, just thinking." "About the board meeting." "About you, actually." He glanced at her briefly. "What about me?" "I'm trying to figure out how you ended up alone on a mountain. A man like you should have women lined up around the block. A man like me. Kind, strong, capable, easy on the eyes." She smiled slightly. "You're the whole package, Garrett Walsh. Why are you still single?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't ready. Because every time I thought about being with someone else, I felt like I was betraying Sarah. Because it was easier to be alone than to risk getting hurt again. And now I'm not so sure anymore." They reached the main road, which had been plowed sometime during the night. The going got easier, and Victoria felt the clock ticking in her head. 2 hours until the board meeting. She needed to be on that helicopter in the next 30 minutes if she was going to make it. "Garrett," she said, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "This wasn't just about survival for me. What happened between us, it meant something. I don't know what yet, but it meant something. For me too. But I can't ask you to wait for me. I don't know how this fight with Richard is going to end. I might lose everything. I might be so buried in legal battles and board meetings that I don't have time to breathe for the next year. It wouldn't be fair to ask you to put your life on hold for that." Garrett pulled the truck to the side of the road and turned to face her fully. "Did I ask you to make me any promises? No, but did I say I expected anything from you? No. Then stop trying to let me off the hook." He reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I'm a grown man, Victoria. I can make my own choices. And I'm choosing to care about you, whatever that means, whatever happens next. You don't get to decide for me that I'm better off without that." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave. I know you're kind even when you try to hide it. I know you've been carrying more weight than any one person should have to carry alone. And I know that when you asked to slip under my blanket, you weren't playing games. You were just cold and scared and human. That's all I need to know." She kissed him then. Not the careful, controlled kiss of two people testing boundaries, but something deeper, more desperate. The kiss of a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted for herself, not her title, or her money, or her power. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "You're going to miss your helicopter," Garrett said roughly. "I know." He put the truck back in gear and pulled onto the road. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive, but Victoria kept her hand on his leg, feeling the warmth of him through the worn denim. The county airport was small, a single runway, a handful of hangars, a terminal building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. But there, sitting on the tarmac, was a sleek helicopter with the Ashworth Industries logo on its side. "Margaret doesn't do anything halfway," Victoria murmured. Garrett pulled up to the gate and stopped. "This is as far as I can go." Victoria turned to him, suddenly unsure. After everything they'd been through, after the storm and the cabin and the night they'd shared, this felt too abrupt, too incomplete. "Come with me," she said. "What?" "To New York. Come with me. Be there when I face Richard." Garrett shook his head slowly. "I can't. Lucas gets home tonight. He's been with my mother for a week, and he'll be expecting me." "Of course. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "Don't be sorry. I wish I could." He reached out and took her hand. "But you don't need me there, Victoria. You've got this. You've been fighting battles like this your whole life. The only difference now is you're going to fight it as your real self, not the Ice Queen. What if that's not enough? It will be. Because the real you is stronger than any mask you've ever worn." Victoria squeezed his hand, feeling tears threaten again. "I don't know how to thank you." "Win. That's how you thank me. Go to New York, face that snake, and take back what's yours. Then when you're ready, come back and tell me about it." "What if I'm not ready for a long time?" "Then I'll wait." He smiled, and something in Victoria's chest cracked wide open. "I've been waiting 3 years already. What's a little longer?" She kissed him one more time, quick and fierce, then opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. The helicopter pilot was already waving her over, checking his watch impatiently. Victoria walked toward the helicopter, then stopped and turned back. Garrett was still sitting in the truck watching her. "I'll come back," she called out. "I promise." "I know you will." She climbed into the helicopter, and within minutes they were airborne, the mountain shrinking beneath her, the tiny figure of Garrett's truck disappearing into the distance. Victoria pressed her hand against the window, watching until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she turned her attention to the phone Margaret had sent with the helicopter. Time to fight. The flight to New York took just under 2 hours. Margaret had sent a change of clothes and a briefing packet, and Victoria spent the entire flight preparing for battle. She reviewed shareholder data, read through Richard's recent communications with board members, and drafted talking points for her speech. But underneath all the strategy, one thought kept circling back. Garrett. She'd left a piece of herself on that mountain. She knew that now. Whatever happened with Richard, whatever the board decided, she wasn't going to be the same person who had driven up that road 2 days ago. She wasn't sure if that terrified her or gave her hope. Maybe both. The helicopter landed on the roof of Ashworth Tower at 9:47 a.m. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 Uhr, 13 minutes to change the course of her future. Margaret was waiting at the helipad, looking like she hadn't slept in 2 days. "Thank God you're here. Richard's been telling everyone you were probably dead. Some of the board members are already talking about memorial services." Well, they can cancel those. Victoria strode toward the elevator, Margaret hurrying to keep up. Where do we stand? Chen and Mitchell are solid. That's 4 votes including yours. Richard has 4. That leaves 3 undecided. Who? Patterson, Young, and Hernandez. They've been playing both sides all morning. Victoria's jaw tightened. Patterson owes me. I saved his division from being cut 3 years ago. He's scared. Richard's been telling everyone you're unstable, that the car crash affected your judgment. Then I'll show them exactly how stable I am. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Victoria walked past stunned assistants and shell-shocked executives who stared at her like they were seeing a ghost. Word spread quickly, the CEO was back from the dead. She reached the boardroom just as the clock struck 10. The door was closed. She could hear Richard's voice inside, smooth and confident, laying the groundwork for his coup. Victoria took a deep breath, thought of Garrett, thought of everything she'd survived to get here. Then she pushed open the door and walked in. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I had a little car trouble." The room went silent. 12 faces turned toward her, some shocked, some relieved, some carefully blank. Richard Keller sat at the head of the table, frozen mid-sentence, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to something darker. "Victoria." He recovered quickly, smoothing his tie. "We thought there were reports that I was dead. Sorry to disappoint you, Richard." She walked to her chair, the chair he was currently occupying, and stood behind it. "You're in my seat." The silence stretched. Richard didn't move. "The board called this meeting," he said finally, "to discuss emergency leadership protocols, given your absence." "My absence was due to a blizzard and a car accident. Not exactly voluntary." Victoria's voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath. "I notice you didn't wait to confirm I was actually incapacitated before making your move. The company needed leadership. The company has leadership. I'm right here." David Chen cleared his throat. "Victoria, we're relieved you're safe. Perhaps we should table this discussion and reconvene when we've all had time to—" "No." Richard's voice cut through the room. "The motion is already on the floor. The board has a right to vote." "On what exactly?" Victoria asked. "On removing a CEO who's been running this company successfully for 8 years. On handing control to a man who's been secretly buying up shares and building coalitions behind everyone's backs." The undecided board members shifted uncomfortably. Patterson wouldn't meet her eyes. "I've done nothing wrong," Richard said smoothly. "Everything I've done has been within the bounds of my authority." "Has it?" Victoria pulled a folder from Margaret's briefing packet. "Then perhaps you can explain the private emails you've been exchanging with our largest competitor. The ones where you discuss acquisition terms for Ashworth Industries assets terms that would personally net you $40 million in consulting fees." The room went absolutely still. Richard's face drained of color. "Those emails are confidential. They're evidence. Evidence that you're not trying to save this company, Richard. You're trying to sell it off piece by piece to the highest bidder while positioning yourself to profit from the destruction." She slid the folder across the table. Chen picked it up, started reading. His expression shifted from curious to appalled. "This is fraud," he said slowly. "This is textbook fiduciary breach." "That's exactly what it is." Victoria's voice rang through the room. "Richard Keller doesn't want to lead Ashworth Industries. He wants to strip it for parts and walk away rich while thousands of employees lose their jobs." "These are fabrications," Richard snarled. "She's been in a car accident. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's—" "I know exactly what I'm saying." Victoria leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "I know that you've been planning this takeover for 18 months. I know that you targeted me specifically because you thought I was weak. And I know that you're terrified right now because you never expected me to walk through that door." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do." Sarah Mitchell's voice was sharp. Because I'm calling for an immediate vote, not on leadership transition, but on Richard Keller's continued position as CFO of this company. Seconded, Chen said. Richard looked around the room searching for allies, but the undecided board members were reading the emails now, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to disgust. Patterson wouldn't meet his eyes. Young was shaking his head slowly. "You can't do this," Richard said, his voice losing its smoothness. "I have contracts, agreements. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. Your lawyers can submit their concerns in writing." Victoria straightened, feeling the power shift in the room like a physical thing. All in favor of terminating Richard Keller for cause. Hands went up. 1, 2, 3. Then Patterson looking ashamed. Then Young. Then Hernandez. 10 votes. More than enough. The motion carries. Victoria's voice was steady, but triumph surged in her chest. "Richard, you have 30 minutes to clear out your office. Security will escort you out." For a moment, Richard just stood there, his face contorted with rage. Then he grabbed his briefcase and stormed toward the door. He stopped beside Victoria, leaning close so only she could hear. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started." "I know exactly what I've started," Victoria said quietly. "I started fighting back, something I should have done a long time ago." Richard's jaw tightened. Then he pushed past her and was gone. The boardroom erupted in conversation, relief congratulations, questions about what had happened on the mountain. Victoria answered what she could, deflected what she couldn't, and eventually begged exhaustion to escape to her office. Margaret was waiting there with coffee and a look of barely contained emotion. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "We did it." Victoria sank into her chair, feeling the adrenaline drain away. "I couldn't have pulled this off without you, Margaret. The helicopter, the documents, all of it. Thank you. I've been waiting 8 years for you to let me help you like this." Margaret's eyes were bright. "I'm just glad you finally did." Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking about Garrett's words on the mountain, about walls and what happened when you finally let them down. "I've been doing a lot of things wrong," she said slowly. "For a long time. I thought being strong meant doing everything alone, but it turns out that's not strength. It's just fear in disguise." "What changed?" Victoria smiled slightly. "I met someone who saw through all my armor and liked what he found underneath. It made me realize that maybe what's underneath is worth showing to other people too." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "This someone, does he have a name?" "Garrett. Garrett Walsh." Victoria turned to look out the window at the Manhattan skyline. "He's a single dad from a small town. He builds things with his hands. He lost his wife 3 years ago, and he's been as broken as I am. And he's the kindest, strongest, most genuine person I've ever met. He sounds nothing like the men you usually date." "I know, that's the point." Victoria turned back to Margaret. "I've spent my whole life with people who wanted something from me. Power, money, influence. Garrett doesn't want any of that. He just wants me, the real me. It's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it." "Well," Margaret said practically, "you could start by not making him wait too long. Men like that don't come along every day." "I know, but I need to sort out this mess with Richard first. Make sure the company is stable. Then what?" Victoria thought about the cabin on the mountain, about the note she'd left on the table, about the promise she'd made as the helicopter took off. "Then I'm going back," she said, "to finish what we started." Margaret smiled. "That's the best thing I've heard you say in 8 years." Victoria smiled back, and for the first time since Michael died, it didn't feel forced. It felt real. 3 weeks passed before Victoria could break away. 3 weeks of damage control legal proceedings, shareholder meetings, and the endless cleanup that followed Richard's removal. The investigation uncovered more than she'd expected. Kickback secret deals, a network of corruption that had been growing right under her nose for years. By the time the lawyers finished, Richard Keller was facing criminal charges, and Ashworth Industries was stronger than it had been in a decade. But every night when Victoria finally made it home to her empty penthouse, she thought about Garrett. She'd called him once, the day after the board meeting. The conversation had been brief. She was exhausted, and he could hear it in her voice. "You won," he said. "I won. I knew you would. I couldn't have done it without you. Without what you said to me on that mountain. Sure you could have. You just needed someone to remind you who you really are." There had been a pause then, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "I'll come back," Victoria had told him, "as soon as I can." "I know. I'll be here." But then the investigation expanded, and the board needed her constant presence, and the days stretched into weeks, and every time she thought about calling again, she found a reason not to. Fear, maybe, or doubt, or the nagging voice in the back of her head that whispered she wasn't good enough for a man like Garrett Walsh. It was Margaret who finally pushed her. "You're miserable," her assistant said bluntly, standing in Victoria's office doorway with a look that brooked no argument. "You've won the biggest battle of your career, and you're walking around like someone kicked your dog." "I'm tired, Margaret. It's been a difficult few weeks." "You've had difficult weeks before. This is different. This is about him, isn't it? The man from the mountain." Victoria didn't answer, which was answer enough. Margaret crossed her arms. "I've worked for you for 15 years. I've seen you face down hostile boards, market crashes, and a global pandemic without blinking. But I've never seen you scared. Not until now." "I'm not scared." "Yes, you are. You're scared that if you go back there, he won't feel the same way. Or that he will, and you won't know how to handle it. You're scared of being happy, Victoria, because you've spent so long being miserable that happiness feels dangerous." Victoria stared at her assistant, this woman who had been by her side through everything, who knew her better than anyone. "When did you become a therapist?" "When my boss started needing one." Margaret softened slightly. "Go to him, Victoria. Whatever happens, you need to know. You need to find out if what you felt on that mountain was real. Because if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering." That night, Victoria booked a flight to Colorado. The drive up the mountain felt different in daylight, without a blizzard trying to kill her. She'd rented an SUV at the county airport, something sturdy, practical, nothing like the luxury vehicle she'd crashed 3 weeks ago. The road was clear now, freshly plowed, though snow still blanketed the peaks above. Her heart was pounding by the time she reached the turnoff to Garrett's cabin. She'd told herself all the rational reasons this was a bad idea. They barely knew each other. They came from different worlds. A relationship based on a crisis rarely survived the return to normal life. But none of that mattered, because Margaret was right. She needed to know. She parked the SUV next to Garrett's old Ford and sat there for a moment, gathering her courage. The cabin looked exactly as she remembered it. Small, weathered, utterly unlike anything in her New York existence. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window she could see movement inside. He was home. Victoria got out of the car, her boots crunching on packed snow, and walked toward the front door. Before she could knock, it opened. Garrett stood there looking exactly as she remembered: flannel shirt, tired eyes, calloused hands. His expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "You came back," he said. "I promised I would." "I know. I just wasn't sure." "Neither was I." She smiled slightly. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside and she walked into the cabin. It was warm, the wood stove crackling, the smell of coffee, mixing with something cooking on the small kitchen range. But what stopped her wasn't the warmth or the smells. It was the boy. He was sitting at the kitchen table, a book open in front of him, looking up at her with curious brown eyes. Dark hair, a spray of freckles across his nose, a face that held echoes of both his parents. "Lucas." "Dad." The boy looked between Victoria and his father. "Who's that?" Garrett moved to stand beside his son, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "Lucas, this is Victoria. She's a friend of mine. The one I told you about. The one from the storm. The one you rescued. That's right. Lucas studied her with the frank appraisal of childhood. You look different than I imagined. How did you imagine me? I don't know. Scared, I guess. Dad said you were really cold when he found you. Victoria smiled. I was. Your father saved my life. He does that sometimes. He saved a dog once, too, and a cat. Lucas considered. But you're the first person. Garrett cleared his throat. Lucas, why don't you finish your reading in your room? I need to talk to Victoria for a bit. Is it grown-up stuff? Yeah, buddy. Grown-up stuff. Lucas sighed dramatically, but gathered his book and disappeared down the short hallway. A door closed, and then they were alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had happened since the last time they stood in this room. He's wonderful, Victoria said finally. He's the best thing in my life. I can see why. Garrett moved to the stove, poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Victoria felt the contact like electricity. I saw the news, he said. Richard's facing criminal charges now, securities fraud conspiracy, 6 other things. He made a lot of enemies over the years. Turns out when you build a house of cards, it doesn't take much to knock it down. And the company, stronger than ever. The board is unified for the first time in years. Stock price is up 15% since the meeting. She paused. I restructured the severance program for Millbrook, doubled the retraining budget. It won't bring back the jobs, but it might help people find new ones. Garrett looked at her. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You were right about a lot of things. About the people I'd hurt even if I didn't mean to. About the walls I'd built. About running from everything real because real things can hurt you. Victoria. Let me finish. She set down her coffee, turned to face him fully. I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to talk myself out of coming here. Telling myself it was foolish, that what we had was just 2 people clinging to each other in a crisis. That once the storm passed, there was no reason for us to be anything to each other. And now I'm here, because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face. Because the only time I felt like myself in the last 3 weeks was when I was remembering what it felt like to be in your arms. Garrett set down his own coffee and stepped closer. I've been thinking, too, about what it would mean for you to come back. About how different our lives are. About whether I have any right to ask you to be part of mine when I can't offer you anything except a cabin on a mountain and an 8-year-old who asks too many questions. That's more than anyone's offered me in years. Victoria. I'm a construction worker from a small town. I drive a truck that's older than some of the people who work for you. I've never been to a board meeting or flown in a private jet. The most expensive thing I own is this cabin, and it's worth less than your watch. I know. So what could we possibly build together? What kind of life could we have? Victoria reached out and took his hands. They were rough, calloused, completely different from the smooth hands of the men she'd dated in New York. But they were also warm, strong, capable. The hands that had pulled her from a wreck, that had held her through the coldest night of her life, that had touched her face with such gentleness that she'd almost forgotten what gentleness felt like. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't have a plan for this. I've never not had a plan before. It terrifies me. Me too. But I know one thing. She tightened her grip on his hands. When I was lying in that cabin freezing to death, you didn't see Victoria Ashworth, the CEO. You didn't see the Ice Queen or the magazine covers or the billion-dollar company. You just saw a woman who needed help, and you helped her. No questions, no conditions, no expectations. That's just basic decency. No, it's not. It's rare. It's so rare that I'd forgotten people like you existed. Her voice cracked slightly. You showed me what it feels like to be cared for without having to earn it. You showed me that there's more to life than board meetings and shareholder value and climbing higher and higher until you can't breathe anymore. You showed me—" She stopped, unable to continue. Garrett pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, burying her face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. The same heartbeat she'd listened to through that endless night, the rhythm that had kept her anchored when everything else was falling apart. "I'm scared too," he murmured into her hair. "I haven't let anyone get close since Sarah. Haven't wanted to. It felt like betraying her memory. And now I think she'd be happy. She always wanted me to stop hiding, to let people in, to be the man she married instead of the shadow I became after she died." He pulled back slightly, looked into her eyes. "You make me want to be that man again." Victoria reached up and touched his face. "So what do we do?" "I don't know. Maybe we figure it out together." "That sounds terrifying." "The best things usually are." She kissed him. Then not the desperate kiss from the car or the fierce kiss in the ranger station, but something softer. A beginning rather than a farewell. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Lucas is going to have questions," Garrett said. "I imagine he is. He seems like that kind of kid. He's going to want to know if you're staying. What are you going to tell him?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. "What should I tell him?" Victoria thought about her life in New York, the penthouse, the company, the endless meetings and reports and decisions. She'd built an empire there, and she wasn't going to walk away from it entirely. But empires could be run from a distance. Board meetings could happen over video. Reports could be read anywhere with an internet connection. And maybe, just maybe, what she'd built wasn't the empire at all. Maybe the real building was just starting now. "Tell him I'm not going anywhere," she said. Garrett's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. "You sure about that?" "I've never been less sure of anything in my life, but I'm also tired of only doing things I'm sure about. Being sure hasn't made me happy. Maybe being unsure with you will." The bedroom door creaked open. Lucas's head appeared around the frame. "Is the grown-up stuff over?" he asked. Garrett laughed. "Yeah, buddy. Come on out." Lucas emerged, fully still holding his book. He looked at Victoria with that same frank assessment she'd seen earlier. "Are you staying for dinner?" he asked. Victoria looked at Garrett. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "If that's okay with you," she said to Lucas. "Dad's making spaghetti. He's not very good at it, but it's okay." "Hey," Garrett protested. "My spaghetti is perfectly fine." "It's okay," Lucas repeated diplomatically. He looked at Victoria again. "Do you know how to cook?" "A little. Not as much as I should." "That's okay. Neither does Dad." Garrett groaned. "Thanks for the support, buddy." But Lucas wasn't finished. He walked over to Victoria, looked up at her with serious brown eyes. "Dad was sad for a long time. After Mom died. He pretended he wasn't, but I could tell. He didn't laugh anymore." Victoria's heart clenched. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard for you." "It was. But he laughs now, since he came back from the mountain, and he talks about you sometimes when he thinks I'm not listening." Lucas tilted his head. "You make him happy, so I think you should stay." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. This boy, this 8-year-old who'd lost his mother and watched his father disappear into grief, was offering her acceptance, trust, a place in his world. She knelt down so she was at his level. "I'd like to stay, if you'll have me, but I want you to know something first." "What?" "I'm not trying to replace your mom. I never could, and I would never try. She was special, and she loved you and your dad very much. Whatever happens between me and your father, she'll always be your mom. Always." Lucas considered this for a moment. Then he nodded solemnly. "Dad keeps pictures of her in my room, and sometimes we talk about her. The stuff we used to do together." "That's good. You should always do that. Keep her memory alive." Will you tell me about you too, where you're from, and what you do and stuff? I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Cool. Lucas looked at his father. Can we eat now? I'm hungry. Garrett laughed again, that warm, genuine laugh that Victoria had first heard in the truck. Sure, buddy. Set the table. Lucas nodded and headed to the kitchen, leaving Victoria and Garrett alone for a moment. You're good with him, Garrett said quietly. He's easy to be good with. He's honest. I appreciate honesty. He gets that from his mother. Sarah never could hide what she was feeling. She sounds wonderful. She was. Garrett's voice was soft, but without the pain she'd heard before. I think you would have liked her, and I think she would have liked you. I hope so. They moved to the kitchen where Lucas was carefully setting out plates and forks. The spaghetti wasn't gourmet, but it was hot and filling, and Victoria couldn't remember the last time a meal had felt so much like home. After dinner, Lucas showed her his drawings, elaborate pictures of mountains and forests, and imaginary creatures. He explained each one in detail, describing adventures he'd invented and worlds he'd created. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions praising his creativity. When Lucas finally yawned and Garrett announced bedtime, the boy surprised them both. Can Victoria tuck me in too? Garrett looked at her, eyebrows raised. Victoria nodded. They walked Lucas to his room together, watched him climb into bed, pulled the covers up to his chin. On the nightstand, Victoria saw the photos he'd mentioned. A beautiful woman with dark hair and laughing eyes holding a baby. The same woman on a beach, on a hiking trail, in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but radiantly happy. Sarah. Good night, buddy, Garrett said, kissing his son's forehead. Night, Dad. Lucas looked at Victoria. You'll be here tomorrow. I'll be here. Promise. Victoria felt the weight of that word. Promise. Such a small word, but it meant everything to a boy who'd already lost so much. I promise, she said. Lucas smiled, closed his eyes, and within minutes he was asleep. They stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe. He doesn't ask people to promise things, Garrett said quietly. Not since Sarah. He learned that promises get broken. I won't break it. I know. They moved back to the living room, sat on the couch in front of the fire. Victoria leaned into Garrett's shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the solidity. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the trees, but this time it didn't sound threatening. It sounded like music. I have to go back to New York, Victoria said after a while. She felt Garrett tense slightly. When? End of the week. There are things I need to handle: transition plans, hiring a new CFO, finalizing the legal proceedings against Richard. I can't just disappear. I understand. But I'm coming back. Every chance I get. And in a few months, once things stabilize, I'm going to restructure my role. Work remotely more. Be here more. Garrett was quiet. Then, you'd do that. Give up your penthouse and your city life to spend time in a cabin on a mountain. The penthouse is empty. The city is lonely. The cabin has you and Lucas. She lifted her head, looked at him. I've spent 15 years building a company. Now I want to build something else. What's that? A life. A real one. With people who matter more than stock prices. Garrett's arm tightened around her. I don't have much to offer. You have everything to offer. You have kindness and strength, and a son who needs a father who laughs. You have a heart that kept beating even when it had every reason to stop. That's more than all the money in the world. He kissed the top of her head. When Sarah died, I thought that was it. I thought I'd had my chance at happiness and blown it. But now what? Now I think maybe we get more than one chance. Maybe the universe is kinder than I gave it credit for. Maybe it is. They sat there, as the fire burned low, as the wind sang outside, as the night wrapped around the cabin like a blanket. Two people who had been broken by loss, finding in each other the missing pieces they'd thought were gone forever. Victoria fell asleep on Garrett's shoulder, and for the first time in years, she didn't dream of boardrooms or balance sheets or the endless march of responsibility. She dreamed of mountains and laughter and a small boy with dark hair and curious eyes. She dreamed of home. The next morning, Victoria woke to the smell of pancakes. She was alone on the couch covered with a blanket that smelled like Garrett. Voices came from the kitchen, Garrett's low rumble, and Lucas's higher chatter mixing together in a domestic symphony she'd never experienced. She lay there for a moment, letting it wash over her. This ordinary thing that wasn't ordinary at all. This simple magic of a family waking up together. Then she got up and joined them. "You're awake." Lucas bounced on his chair. "Dad's making pancakes. I helped mix." "They look delicious." "They're shaped like blobs. Dad can't do shapes." "Blobs are shapes," Garrett protested, sliding a pancake onto a plate. "Real shapes, like circles or stars." "Circles are basically blobs." Victoria laughed, accepting the plate Garrett handed her. "Thank you. For everything." He leaned down, kissed her lightly. "Thank you for being here." They ate breakfast together, Lucas filling the silence with stories about school and friends, and a project he was working on about hibernating animals. Victoria listened, asked questions, and watched Garrett watch his son with such love that it made her chest ache. This was what she'd been missing. Not just romance or companionship, but this sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than herself. After breakfast, Garrett announced he had to run into town for supplies. "You two okay here for an hour?" Victoria looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at Victoria. "We'll manage," she said. When Garrett's truck disappeared down the road, Lucas turned to her with a serious expression. "Can I show you something?" "Of course." He led her to his room, to the photos on his nightstand. He picked up one, Sarah holding him as a baby, and handed it to her. "That's my mom," he said. "She died when I was 5. I don't remember a lot, but I remember she smelled nice. And she used to sing to me at bedtime." Victoria held the photo carefully. "She's beautiful. Dad says I have her eyes." Lucas sat on his bed, his legs dangling. "I was scared when Dad told me about you. I thought, I don't know, that he was going to forget about her." Victoria sat beside him. "That's not going to happen." "I know, but I was still scared." He looked up at her. "You're not going to make him forget, are you?" "No, never. Your mom was part of his life, part of your life, and that doesn't change because I'm here. We can love people who are gone and still love new people too. The heart doesn't run out of room." Lucas considered this. "Like how I can love Mom and still love Grandma." "Exactly like that. And like how Dad can love Mom and still love you." Victoria's breath caught. "Is that what you think? That your dad loves me?" "I don't think it. I know it. He gets this look when he talks about you. The same look he used to get when he talked about Mom." Lucas shrugged. "It took him a long time to get that look again. So I know it's real." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "Oh no." Lucas looked alarmed. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You said everything right." She wiped her eyes, laughing at herself. "I'm just not used to people being so honest with me. Dad says honesty is the most important thing. He says lies hurt more than truth, even when truth is hard. Your dad is a smart man. He's pretty smart. Not as smart as Mom was, though. She knew everything." Victoria smiled. "I bet she did." They spent the next hour looking through Lucas's drawings, talking about his school and his friends and his dreams for the future. He wanted to be a firefighter, he told her, like the ones who came to his school last year. Or maybe a pilot. Or maybe someone who builds houses like his dad. By the time Garrett returned, something had shifted between Victoria and Lucas. A bridge had been built, fragile but real. The beginning of trust. Garrett noticed immediately. His eyes moved between them, seeing the tear tracks on Victoria's face. The easy way Lucas sat beside her, the warmth that hadn't been there before. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's perfect," Victoria said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she meant it. The rest of the week passed too quickly. Victoria worked remotely during the days, handling urgent matters from the cabin's surprisingly decent Wi-Fi. But every evening belonged to Garrett and Lucas dinners together, games by the fire, long conversations after Lucas went to bed. She learned that Garrett had been a Marine before construction, that he'd met Sarah at a county fair, and proposed 6 months later that he'd built this cabin with his own hands after his father passed away. She learned that Lucas was gifted in math, but struggled with reading, that he still had nightmares sometimes about losing his mother, that he collected rocks because Sarah had taught him their names. And she told them about herself. About the mother who died too young, and the father who never learned to love. About Michael and the guilt she'd carried for 7 years. About the loneliness of success, and the emptiness of penthouses, and the revelation that had struck her in a blizzard that she'd been building the wrong things all along. The night before she had to leave for New York, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets watching the stars. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," Victoria said. 3 at the most. "I know. And then I'm staying longer. A month maybe. I'm restructuring my travel schedule." "You don't have to." "I want to." She turned to face him. "I've spent 15 years putting the company first. Now I'm putting this first. You and Lucas and whatever we're building together." Garrett reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "When you first crashed on my mountain, I thought you were the last person in the world I'd want to spend time with. And now you're the first person I think about when I wake up, and the last person I think about before I sleep." His voice roughened. "I love you, Victoria. I know it's fast. I know it doesn't make logical sense. But I love you." Victoria's heart soared. "I love you too. I've been trying not to say it because it seemed too soon, too crazy. But I love you, Garrett Walsh. You and your cabin, and your blob-shaped pancakes, and your son who asks too many questions." He kissed her, then under the stars, while the wind whispered through the pines and the mountain stood witness to something new being born. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. "I didn't think I'd feel this way again," Garrett said. "After Sarah." "Neither did I. After Michael." "Guess we were both wrong." "Guess we were." They sat there until the cold drove them inside, holding hands, watching the sky, making plans for a future neither had expected. The next morning, Victoria hugged Lucas goodbye, a real hug, fierce and tight, the kind she hadn't given anyone in years. 2 weeks, she reminded him. "I'll count the days." "I'll bring you something from New York." "Can you bring pizza? Dad says New York pizza is better than Colorado pizza." Victoria laughed. "I'll see what I can do." Garrett drove her to the airport, walked her to the security line, held her one last time. "This isn't goodbye," she said. "I know. It's see you soon." "See you soon." She kissed him, memorizing the feel of his lips, the strength of his arms, the steady beat of his heart. Then she walked through security, boarded her plane, and flew back to New York. But this time, she wasn't leaving home. She was carrying it with her. 1 year later, Victoria Ashworth stood on the porch of the cabin on the mountain, watching Lucas chase fireflies across the meadow. So much had changed. She'd stepped back from day-to-day operations at Ashworth Industries, taking a role as chairman rather than CEO. She split her time between New York and Colorado, working remotely more than she ever thought possible. The company was thriving. The Millbrook retraining program had become a model for corporate responsibility nationwide. Richard Keller was serving 3 years for securities fraud. But none of that mattered as much as this. This evening. This moment. This life she'd built from the wreckage of a blizzard and a car crash and a stranger's kindness. Garrett came out onto the porch, handed her a cup of tea. "He's going to exhaust himself," he said, nodding toward Lucas. "Let him. He's happy. He is. Garrett wrapped an arm around her. We all are. Victoria leaned into him, feeling the peace she'd spent 52 years searching for. She thought about all the paths that had led here, the loss and grief, the walls and armor, the storm that had nearly killed her and instead saved her life. Garrett. Yeah. Thank you. For what? For opening your blanket. For letting me in. For giving me something I didn't know I needed until I found it. He kissed the top of her head. You gave me the same thing. We saved each other, Victoria. That's how it works. Lucas came running up breathless and grinning, a firefly cupped in his hands. Look, I caught one. Let me see, Victoria said, kneeling down. The firefly glowed between Lucas's fingers, tiny and fragile and beautiful. Like hope. Like second chances. Like love found in the most unlikely places. Can we keep it? Lucas asked. We should let it go, Garrett said. It belongs with its family. Lucas considered this, then opened his hands. The firefly hovered for a moment, glowing, then flew away to join the others dancing across the meadow. That's okay, Lucas said. I've got my family right here. He grabbed Victoria's hand with one of his Garrett's with the other and pulled them both toward the cabin. Come on, you promised we could make s'mores tonight. Victoria laughed, letting herself be pulled along, feeling Garrett's hand in hers, watching the fireflies light up the darkness. She'd spent her whole life building an empire. Now she'd found something better. She'd found home, and home, she finally understood, wasn't a place or a company or a number on a balance sheet. Home was the people who loved you without conditions, who saw you without armor, who held you through the storms and laughed with you in the sunshine. Home was a cabin on a mountain, a man with calloused hands, and a boy who asked too many questions. Home was this moment, this evening, this life. And Victoria Ashworth had finally, after all these years, come home.